She was not on the flight manifest. She had not been cleared to lead. When the roster was posted at dawn, her name was missing, though she stood in uniform like the others. Boots polished, helmet packed, no explanation was given. Just a quiet instruction to remain behind and hold readiness. Hold. 2 hours later, the skies turned to fog. The teams fell silent on open comms, and the evacuation window closed. Everyone waited for orders. None came. And then everything changed. Not because she was given permission, but because she didn't need it. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. Mira stood on the edge of the hangar, the morning light dull and bruised as a layer of fog pushed in off the coast. The tarmac buzzed with movement. Ground crews ran double checks on cables and pallets. Pilots moved in staggered loops from briefing tents to rotors, calling out clearances and engine codes as if they were rehearsing for a show. The low whine of generator carts hummed beneath the louder rhythm of flight prep. Everyone had a purpose, a call sign, a flight path. Everyone but her. She wore her gloves looped through her belt, the fingers curled as if still holding something useful. Her boots left no mark on the scuffed concrete beneath her. The clipboard in her hands was stiff from humidity, its edge warping slightly where the heat had kissed it. Printed across the top of the sheet in bold marker was a single word: manifest. That was her role for the day. Not loading, not coordinating air paths, just holding the list. From one of the open canopies near the CH-53 bay, a young crew chief glanced toward her and grinned sideways at his teammate. Command's got Mira babysitting the clipboard again, he said loud enough to carry. Hope it doesn't blow away. Big responsibility. His teammate chuckled without looking up. Mira didn't move. The wind shifted and tugged at the corner of the paper, but she kept her hand steady, thumb pressing the edge flat. A polished flight officer passed in front of her on the way to the ops tent. He didn't stop or speak. His gaze skimmed past her like she was part of the equipment. Behind him, 2 junior aviators adjusted their harness straps and muttered something about dry boots and support staff. One of them made a mock salute toward her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She nodded. Barely. The Stallion behind her sat cold. Its fuselage bore the scars of salt air and grit, rotor blades still folded, power off, a bird without orders. Inside the command structure, briefing monitors flickered under dull LED strips. Weather overlays had shifted shade twice in the last 20 minutes. The fog wasn't on the forecast, but now it clung to the outer edge of the flight field like it had been waiting for a window. Visibility dropped from 600 meters to 200.0, then to 100.0. No announcements were made yet, but Mira saw the glances between crew leaders begin to change. The board updated again. One of the outbound UH-1s was quietly reflagged with a hold status. Another 2 CH-47s were still prepped, their pilots helmeted and pacing in slow, mechanical loops, waiting for a go that would never come. Mira adjusted her grip on the clipboard. Her gloves bounced slightly at her side with each step as she crossed to the windward side of the hangar where the watch point had been marked. No one acknowledged her move. A group of load techs near the edge of the parking line raised a thermos to one another in a mock toast. One said something about backup birds never flying. Another responded that someone had to count the boxes. Right. The fog thickened. Mira could no longer see the far end of the landing strip where the last C-130 had been parked. A shape moved briefly in the mist. One of the security trucks. Maybe. Or a drone cart coming back from the pad, but it vanished before she could track it. The wind changed again, this time colder. She pulled the clipboard against her chest and pressed it flat as the page flapped once, then stilled. The print was still legible. 4 aircraft had been assigned the first evac loop. 2 were already grounded. 1 was delayed on secondary fueling. The fourth had launched but was now rerouted midair to a shorter inland strip due to low visual ceiling. Mira heard the murmur before she saw the officer. A commander in full vest detail walked briskly toward the field team, his voice clipped with authority. "Abort Bravo 2. Echo 3 can't push with visibility under 100.0. Flag Delta segment for hold. I want all secondary craft ready but grounded." A murmur of confirmation followed. The man never looked in her direction. His words moved over and around her. Mira turned slightly and looked toward the row of seated reserve crew behind the tent partition. They weren't suited up. None of them were even in flight boots. A younger tech brushed past her carrying a comms relay unit. As he passed, he said without looking, "You're still on manifest. They should make you a desk." Then he disappeared into the fog. The sun never made it past the clouds. By mid-morning, the air hung still and wet. Sweat clung beneath collars even though the temperature hadn't broken 70. Pilots with high hours were leaning against the hangar beams, muttering about lost windows, bad calls, over-reliance on digital systems. No one spoke about what came next. The evac site was still unconfirmed, but everyone knew the pier wasn't going to hold. Mira remained near the edge of the open floor, clipboard against her hip, gloves still looped and ready. Her hair had loosened in the humidity. A few strands stuck to her cheek, but she didn't move to brush them away. From her vantage point, she could still see the CH-53's undercarriage. One of the mechanics had left a panel slightly ajar near the rear hydraulics. No one noticed. No one walked toward it. Inside the ops tent, the launch board was clearing, one name at a time. Launch scrubbed, launch scrubbed, launch unknown. A junior officer stepped outside with a small speaker unit slung over one shoulder and called to no one in particular. "If your bird is flagged yellow or red, return to post-check stations. Next update in 20 minutes. The voice didn't echo. It just hung there, heavy, fog-dampened. Mira folded the manifest sheet once and tucked it behind the strap of her belt. She didn't need it anymore. She had memorized the names, the units, the weight allocations, the flight path grid, not because anyone asked her to, because someone had to. A group of suited pilots stepped out from the main ready room laughing at something she couldn't hear. One pointed toward the fog. "Well, that's that," he said, shaking his head. "No one's going through that mess today." No one except the person already turning back toward the Stallion. Mira adjusted the gloves at her hip, still looped, still unused. The fog rolled deeper into the airfield, swallowing the outer line of floodlights as if they had never been there. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just kept watching. Mira stepped into the diagnostics bay as the fog outside thickened. Inside, the lighting was dull and mechanical, casting pale reflections on the metal cabinets that lined the back wall. She moved quietly, avoiding the center walkway where others might pass. One cabinet near the far corner required a key, and she withdrew it from a side pocket without drawing attention. The click of the lock was soft. Inside, under a rolled canvas, lay the thermal anomaly map, faded, annotated, and ignored by everyone but her. It had been from a training cycle 3 months ago, written off as an overbuild when the terrain changed. But Mira hadn't forgotten. She unrolled it carefully, tracing each corridor, each bend in the thermal layer with her fingertip. Every pattern was still in her head. She didn't need a guide. She needed confirmation. The fog wasn't random. It was settling just as the corridor predicted it would. The hum of nearby machinery kept a steady rhythm. An avionics officer passed the open door, carrying a tablet and shaking his head. Mira didn't look up. She folded the map once and tucked it under her arm, then moved to the back system station. The control terminal was unoccupied. She logged in with an older code that still cleared, then bypassed the display settings to open the stored visual overlay from the earlier drill. The corridor glowed faint orange on the screen, its path weaving between thermal pockets and terrain shifts like veins through stone. She adjusted the scale twice, narrowing the field until the outer edges aligned with the current coastal grid. The fog coverage matched. Not perfectly, but closely enough that she could feel it rather than see it. Her finger hovered over the predictive overlay line. She knew where the pocket would break. It was narrow, 200 meters at its widest point, but it was real. Across the hangar, more aircraft were flagged for hold. Voices rose behind plastic partitions, clipped and tense. Someone mentioned optical failure. Another complained that radar bounce from the waterline was scrambling feed. A junior pilot called into his headset that his clearance had just been revoked. The words drifted toward the bay, carried by the same wind pushing fog through the open cargo doors. Mira shut down the terminal, cleared her login, and tucked the map into a sealed folder. No one had come into the room. No one had seen the data. She crossed to the CH-53's panel bay, stepping lightly to avoid drawing attention. One of the maintenance hatches was already unlocked. She opened it and began checking the interior avionics manually. There was no reason to check. The systems were on standby, but she needed the tactile memory. She ran one gloved hand along the seal, then pressed 2 knuckles to the thermal regulator gauge. The reading was steady. From across the lot, she heard someone shouting that the pier evac team had been cut from rotation. Another voice responded that a reroute wasn't possible with visibility under 100.0. It didn't matter. The corridors weren't visible on radar. They were sensed. Remembered. Mira stepped back from the hatch and turned toward the mission prep tent. She didn't enter, just stood at the edge, watching the reflection of the fog inside the curved plastic window. The silhouette of a flight lead leaned into a monitor. Beside him, a second figure held a printout, shaking their head. Another delay. Inside the crew lounge, Mira found her helmet resting where she had left it. It was clean, unissued, still marked with a placeholder number. She wiped the surface with her sleeve, then set it down next to the map folder. The hangar lights flickered slightly as the generator grid rebalanced. Power fluctuations were increasing. Too much idle time. Too many aircraft burning readiness with no launch. She moved to the back locker and retrieved her backup diagnostic scanner. The tool wasn't assigned to her anymore, but she had never returned it. It fit her grip perfectly, as though it knew whose hand it waited for. She slotted a short cable into the receiver and ran a silent scan across the nav port of the standby Stallion. No errors, just latency, as expected. A mechanic in the far aisle raised his voice, asking who had adjusted the beacon parameters. Someone else responded that no adjustments had been made. The first voice said they had readings suggesting an anomaly grid had been loaded into the archive, but it wasn't visible on command logs. Mira lowered the scanner and walked away before anyone turned around. The fog pressed closer against the hangar opening now. The floodlights had gone from silver to orange, casting blurred halos against the air. From the cargo stack, she retrieved a harness and checked the winch controller battery. Fully charged. Another coincidence, maybe. Or maybe someone had meant for this bird to launch and never gotten the clearance. She returned to her locker and placed the scanner beside her helmet. Her gloves were already looped through the side loop. She pulled them free and flexed her fingers into the lining. They fit. Around her, footsteps echoed quick, uncertain. Voices blurred against the sound of shifting metal. Another hold order came over the general speaker, low and final. All remaining outbound units were frozen. Emergency channel traffic only. Final announcement, no recovery flight window scheduled. Ground command would reassess at 0700. Mira stood still for a moment, her right hand resting on the sealed folder, her left adjusting the glove cuff just beneath her jacket sleeve. In the quiet that followed, she reached for her helmet. She didn't check the window again. She already knew what the sky looked like. She knew what the corridor felt like. She had memorized it months ago. Now it was waiting. The fog had thickened into something solid. It no longer drifted. It clung. Mira stood behind the hangar bulkhead, her eyes on the runway where nothing moved. The Stallion sat silent under the floodlights, its blades still folded and body gleaming faintly with moisture. The sky had gone flat and colorless. Nothing had launched in over an hour. Inside the operations tent, voices rose and fell without direction. A commander's tone cracked over the general channel. All flights were ordered to stand down. There was no visual corridor, no recovery. Another voice, softer and more rehearsed. Confirmed receipt. The evac team would be flagged as deferred. A public statement was in the works. Mira could still hear the evacuation team's open channel, the part no one acknowledged. Their voices didn't match the report. One asked if the helicopters had launched yet. Another, quieter and worn thin, just asked if this meant no one was coming. The silence that followed was longer than anyone admitted. Then the line clicked dead. Near the fuel depot, two junior officers circled a grounded tiltrotor and argued about protocols. The fog had dropped visibility below 100.0. The drone-assisted targeting feed was completely degraded. One of them said it didn't matter, the corridor was theoretical. It had been logged months ago during a drill, then discarded. If it wasn't live on satellite, it didn't exist. Mira's eyes never left the CH-53. It was still powered down, still tethered to a post no one had touched. She stepped away from the equipment rack and walked with slow precision toward the aircraft. Her gloves were already on. She didn't rush. Each bootstep tapped quietly against the metal-grated pad, muffled by the damp. The fog was thick enough now that she passed 3 mechanics without them noticing her at all. She reached the left nacelle and climbed the small access ladder that had been left clipped to the side. The hangar light had begun to fail, casting only a soft orange arc into the fog. Everything outside that beam was colorless. Cold. In the cockpit. She sat without adjusting the seat. It was already set to standard. Her movements were deliberate. Chin strap buckled, helmet secured. Her hands moved to the switches, then paused. She opened the auxiliary override panel and unlocked the nav input port. The grid was there, just dimmed, buried in non-essential storage. She tapped in the first coordinate manually, then another, then 4 more. The corridor plotted itself silently across the terrain overlay. Down below, a flight lead was shouting about the remaining birds needing to be fueled and wheeled back into the maintenance rack. Another officer mentioned that the last weather scan confirmed no break-in conditions until late morning. A voice asked what to tell the media. The answer came flat. Weather had precluded safe recovery. The evac team was not abandoned. They were repositioned. The phrase fog-limited environment would be used to frame the outcome. Mira tapped the fuel priming switch. The system came alive with a low, rolling hum. Engine pressure stabilized. No warnings. No alerts. The main rotor spun once, then held. She adjusted the throttle with her left hand, watching the thermal corridor populate on the HUD. The map flickered, then stabilized. Through the cockpit glass, she could see only white and shadow. There were no shapes, no horizon, but she knew where she was. She knew where she was going. The internal radio pinged once. One of the evac crew had forgotten to mute their feed. A voice whispered something about the structure groaning beneath them. Steel supports. Buckling. Another voice, older and quiet, told someone nearby to sit down. If help wasn't coming, they needed to stay still. There was nowhere else to go. Mira closed the channel without speaking. She had heard enough. The Stallion system check reached nominal. She slid her palm across the flight panel and confirmed hydraulic balance. Rotor alignment locked. Her thumb hovered over the ignition. One more breath passed. At the far end of the hangar, a group of officers were clustered over a printed draft. The mission language was being sanitized. The command staff wanted to avoid liability while still conveying respect, courage without blame, failure without record. Mira was not in that draft. Neither was the aircraft she was sitting in. She shifted in the pilot seat. Her boots settled against the pedal grips. The fog pressed harder against the canopy. It was like looking into blankness. But she wasn't flying into nothing. She was flying into memory. Outside the windshield, the floodlights blurred and vanished. The perimeter faded to gray. She powered on the winch system. Then she lifted the throttles. The CH-53 growled beneath her, a low vibration that moved through steel and air and silence. One mechanic looked up, confused, scanning the fog for where the sound was coming from. The sound didn't repeat. It grew, slowly. A full launch cycle, quiet but undeniable, began to build inside the hangar. In the operations tent, someone stepped outside to ask who had called in the startup. No one answered. The flight board hadn't been touched. The Stallion wasn't flagged for movement. Mira was already 20 meters above the tarmac by the time anyone registered that something had changed. Inside the cockpit, her hands were steady. There were no instructions in her headset, no flight control from the tower, no acknowledgements, no authorization, just the steady alignment of the HUD, the glow of the thermal corridor, and the growing rhythm of the rotor blades carving a path through the mist. Outside the windshield, fog pressed against the glass like slow-moving ash. Mira engaged system warm-up. There were no alarms, no alerts, no clearance. At the far end of the hangar, the command staff resumed drafting their statement, still polishing the language around conditions outside our control. Mira's hands moved with practiced rhythm. Instrument sweep, power system check, rotor sequence locked. She tapped the thermal overlay one last time. It flickered, then held. Outside the cockpit, the voices blurred behind the engine hum. No one had seen her step away from the manifest post. No one had stopped her. They hadn't even looked. The fog had concealed the runway, but not the corridor, not for her. The Stallion lifted gently from the tarmac, not with force, but with balance. Mira kept her hands locked in position, fingertips grazing the throttle just enough to feel each correction in the rotors. The HUD glowed with soft orange and pale blue. The thermal grid overlay, blinking steady along the remembered corridor. Outside, the world was white and silent. Inside the cockpit, there were no voices, no commands. Only the faint sound of systems humming and the precise whir of active gyros. She entered each course adjustment by hand. The corridor was invisible to the naked eye, hidden beneath layers of heat differentials and shallow terrain. But she had memorized every bend. The fog grew thicker as she cleared the outer pad. Below her, no one had seen the launch. Someone in the hangar called out that a bird had moved without clearance. Another voice asked if the systems had glitched. No one answered. Mira was already gone. She kept the CH-53 steady as she passed into the blind zone. Wind resistance shifted as she crossed into the first thermal pocket. Her grip adjusted. Slight pedal. The HUD kept its path unbroken. The cold outside had swallowed everything. The sky, the coastline, the floor of the ocean. All gone. Only the grid remained, lit across the glass with the clean, simple precision of memory. Back at base, radio traffic spiked. A tech shouted something about a rotor wash signature moving against directive. Someone else asked if a Stallion had been reassigned without notification. Then the scramble began. Too late. The aircraft was out of visual range. By the time the thermal trackers activated, she was 500 meters offshore and dropping low into the corridor, just as she had planned. She flew by touch, not instinct. Instinct was reaction. This was rehearsal. The fog rippled slightly near the inlet. The first windbreak causing a thermal curl. Mira adjusted her pitch to compensate. Too much yaw would bounce the signal. Too little, and the corridor would vanish. She had no radar to verify. Only trust. Only recall. Her eye flicked once to the upper left of the HUD. The line remained solid. Outside the cockpit, the air blurred like milk poured into still water. No definition. Just density. A voice broke through her secondary channel. Not command. Not the evac team. Just noise. Crossfeed. Someone calling for confirmation of aircraft count. Someone else demanding visual. The rest dissolved into static. Mira leaned forward slightly and increased speed. The CH-53's tone shifted. Not louder. Just deeper. More certain. She guided it beneath the fog's surface layer, into the pocket between two shallow ridgelines marked only on the old grid. To her left, a faint pulse showed the second turn marker. She made the arc gently, letting inertia hold the tail. No oversteer. No correction needed. Behind her, the coast disappeared entirely. Ahead, the corridor narrowed. At the base, more confusion. One officer insisted that no launch had occurred. Another swore they heard rotor wash. A command supervisor demanded immediate transponder verification. Nothing returned. Mira had killed the tag before takeoff. Nothing about her was traceable through official channels. The nav suite override was still buried under diagnostic mode. She banked right at the second fold, threading between two thermal shifts. The HUD dimmed for half a second, then flared bright again. The corridor had held. A new patch of static lanced across her headset. A different channel now. Not one she recognized. Then silence again. She kept flying. The grid line pulled right, then down. Mira followed it without looking. Her eyes were steady on the forward overlay. The water below couldn't be seen, but she knew it was there barely 10 meters down, cutting between outcrops that couldn't be spotted with any instrument still running. She dipped lower, letting the air pressure do half the work. The aircraft didn't resist. It glided along the corridor like it belonged there. Back on base. Someone found her name on the manifest clipboard and realized it was missing. But there was no record of her assignment, no code flag, nothing to point to her as the pilot of anything. One tech asked if she had been in the hangar. No one could say. She had been there. And then she wasn't. Mira kept her focus forward. The next curve came fast, a 90-degree flare to port where the corridor narrowed to less than 200 meters across. The fog peeled and reformed instantly, the thermal pulse hugging the shape of the land beneath. It looked like chaos. It wasn't. She turned just before the flare. The Stallion curved perfectly through the path. No turbulence, no crosswind. Her hands never tightened. The HUD pulsed once. She was on time. The last stretch opened before her like a dark throat cut through white noise. One long lane, one final bearing. She let the throttle slip slightly to keep momentum without climb. She tapped the winch arm control to prep for remote descent. The pier would be within visual range in 40 seconds. She gave no notice, sent no signal. The corridor was hers alone. At the base, a low-ranking officer suggested it might have been a drone test. Another countered that no drone moved like that. The conversation went nowhere. Inside, the cockpit. Mira breathed through the mask and made no sound. The Stallion moved as one with her memory. She reached the final bend and held her path steady. Outside, the fog began to break in pulses, light shifting behind smoke. Shadows appeared on the edge of her vision. The pier, half visible, burned out and breaking. The corridor had delivered her. She lowered altitude. No announcements, no permission, no hesitation. The CH-53 dipped out of the sky and disappeared into the wall of fog with surgical quiet, too fast and too clean for anyone to catch on radar. The skeletal outline of the pier appeared in pulses, half-formed through fog, then lit by the flicker of orange fire beneath broken steel. The CH-53 hovered just above it, blades drawing in low air with a deep thunder that folded back against the collapsing shoreline. Mira's hands stayed locked on the controls, her grip steady, her eyes flicking between thermal overlays and the shapes forming below. The HUD marked outlines in soft blue, figures huddled at uneven intervals across the platform. The pier groaned under its own weight, a voice of slow failure echoing upward into the rotors. Mira extended the winch. The first line descended, swinging once before it caught wind. The harness settled and danced against steel as the evacuee scrambled into position. No radio orders passed. No one called her name. They just moved. One by one. They clipped in. One by one. She lifted them. A slow rhythm built down. Attach. Rise. Retract. Every movement timed between swells of heat and the sharp pitch of nearby collapse. On the far edge of the platform, a fuel drum caught. The fire crawled along splintered lines toward an abandoned camera case. Smoke curled and vanished into fog, but the light flared behind it, throwing Mira's helicopter into sharp silhouette. From below, someone tilted a handheld lens toward the sky. A boom mic recorded what the human eye couldn't see. Rotor wash, cables tightening, the shriek of pulling metal, and the breathless line from a young voice near the edge of the platform. "It's her." Mira adjusted the yaw half a degree to compensate for the drift. Steel shifted. The platform bent. She dropped the winch again. Another evacuee scrambled to position. The fog rose to chest height. No one could see more than a few feet, but they moved anyway. The deck pitched. 2 evacuees went to their knees to keep balance. Mira timed the next lift between tremors, tracking the angle of the pier as it began to shear away at the base. She couldn't hold for long. Her HUD flashed a thermal burst from the ruptured edge. Heat flooded the side sensors. She muted the alarm manually and kept flying. The 5th evacuee hesitated before clipping in. A second later, another hand reached forward and snapped the harness shut. Mira lifted them both at once, the cable straining, the winch groaning against load limits. She didn't flinch. Her hand stayed on the throttle, her other on the grip. The Stallion responded without hesitation. Half the platform dropped as she cleared the second lift. Water exploded upward. Fog swallowed the brake instantly. No one cried out. No one cursed. The crew still on the pier turned toward the cable and waited. The third lift came just as the fire reached the center beam. Sparks rose with the winch. Shadows twisted along the fog wall like silhouettes behind paper. In the cockpit, Mira tapped the HUD again, zooming the grid tighter. The map confirmed 4 bodies still on the pier. 1 crouched low. 2 carried gear. The last stood back, holding a signal wand that flickered red, then white, then dark. She adjusted position 6 meters starboard. The rotor wash pushed smoke outward in a ring. The HUD cleared. The 4th lift began. The cable dropped fast now. Every second mattered. Below, one of the evacuees crouched beside a fallen antenna and waved the final team member forward. Mira locked eyes with the target outline. Her hands did the rest. The last evacuee clipped in as the pier gave its final groan. One of the central beams cracked inward and dropped. Steel folded into water. Mira pulled the winch line tight and lifted clean. The Stallion rose just ahead of the collapse, smoke curling into the cavity left behind. The entire platform vanished beneath them. Fog surged to fill the airspace. No voices followed her up. No confirmation. No applause. She climbed through the firelight until there was only white again. The CH-53 came through the fog like a shadow peeled from the sky. Its landing gear touched down, slow, heavy, quiet. Steam rolled from the engine cowls, and the rotor blades coasted to a lazy drift. Mira stepped down alone. Her suit was soaked, her gloves still strapped tight. Water slid from the hem of her flight jacket and puddled across the hangar floor. Her boots left a trail that no one followed. There was no fanfare, no shouts, just the sound of hydraulic wine fading into silence. Inside the operations room, a staffer read aloud from a draft document. The team was finalizing disciplinary language, unauthorized lift, system override, conduct incompatible with mission structure. The draft memo was time-stamped 3 minutes before her wheels touched down. A communications officer clicked open the regional stream from the pier. The news crew's backup audio had already been pulled and tagged. One file, unfiltered. A technician raised the speaker volume. The room was mid-sentence when it hit. A clipped voice played back across the airwaves. Who authorized her? A pause, then another voice. Young, calm, just above the wind. She didn't wait to be. No one moved. In the glass wall beyond the mission table, Mira came into view. Her walk was slow, not from fatigue, but because there was nowhere to rush to. Her hair was matted down, rain heavy, her shoulders set. Her eyes didn't search the room. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. The audio played again, the same line, clearer this time. She didn't wait to be. The staffer lowered the tablet to the desk. The disciplinary memo was still open, the cursor blinking near a sentence that now felt like fiction. 2 officers by the comms rack stood without meaning to. They didn't salute. They didn't speak, but they turned, fully, as she passed the glass. One nodded slightly, another just watched. The hallway lights glinted off her soaked collar. A few drops trailed behind her on the polished tile. She passed the doorway. Didn't slow. Didn't break stride. Her presence moved like a wave. Not loud, but large. The operations room remained still. No one said her name. No one asked for explanation. The draft letter stayed unsigned. Outside, the fog still hung low on the tarmac. The last echo of the rotor wash faded behind her as Mira disappeared down the corridor. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. They had already seen her. She was left off the flight list, told to wait, to hold the clipboard while others were cleared to lead. No one expected her to act, let alone succeed. And yet, when the mission began to unravel, when the fog closed in and all other options fell away, she was the one who stepped forward, not for recognition, not for glory, but because she knew the route, remembered the corridor, and trusted herself when no one else would. This was not about defiance. It was about quiet conviction, about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, and especially when they are not. If her story speaks to something in you, a belief in staying steady, in acting without applause, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more quiet, powerful stories of service and strength, we hope you will follow along.